everybody, and welcome to our one-year anniversary show of the Monthly Blend. The Monthly Blend is a video podcast that my co-host Anthony Millen and I created a year ago in order to talk to business leaders and game changers in the Baltimore-Washington corridor, which encompasses Northern Virginia, obviously, as well. Today, we have a special show. We have three of the leading beacons of economic development in our region, and I would like them to introduce themselves in no particular order, well, in alphabetical order. We have Victor Hoskins, who's president and CEO of the Fairfax County Economic Development Authority. We have Jack Mcdougall, who's the president and CEO of the Greater Washington Board of Trade. And we have Ben Wu, who's president and CEO of the Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation, on whose board I proudly serve. So
probably you do.
I do. And thank you for your leadership, all three of you, especially Ben. And to kick things off, why don't we start with Victor and then Jack and then Ben, do a little self-introduction. Tell us a little bit about yourselves and about your organization, and then we'll turn it over to Anthony, who's got our first set of questions.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, Tian and Anthony, thank you so much for the opportunity to really be with my colleagues. Jack and Ben both are very, very important regional leaders. And actually, in the last 3 or 4 years, we've worked together more closely, which is really fantastic. Ben and I have a long history. We worked together almost 20 years ago in the state of Maryland. But in terms of my background, I've been in the region for about 25 years. I would say the last 10 years have probably been the most interesting because I've spent all of that time in the public sector. I first served as Deputy Mayor for Economic Development back in 2011. And we did some great projects like the Wharf City Center, just really spectacular projects that really transformed the city in many ways. And then I went on to Arlington and I helped attract Amazon HQ2. But not before that, I actually did a short stint in Prince George's County where I actually helped the MGM project get off the ground. So I've been involved in a lot of great projects. Most recently, I've been here for the last 2 years in Northern Virginia and Fairfax County specifically, just really tying together our relationship with the other jurisdictions. We'll talk about that more later on. But Microsoft, Google, Facebook, we've had a really great run. In all those places, I've had great teams, a lot of great cooperation. And I got to say, this region is second to none in terms of being an attractive location for companies. So I've just enjoyed the business. It's just so much fun for me.
Well, thank you so much for your leadership, Victor. It's great to watch the progress of all the work that you've been doing. Next, we have Jack Mcdougall with the Greater Washington Board of Trade. Jack, welcome.
Well, great. Thanks. Thanks, Tian and Anthony, for inviting me to participate in this conversation, and Ben and Victor. It's a continuing conversation that we've been having on a regular basis now for quite a while. In my background, I've spent a lot of time really around economic capacity building and have an interest in manufacturing, in particular advanced manufacturing and innovation in particular, and a lot of what we're going to talk about today too around the innovation economy and innovation ecosystems and startups. That really is the lifeblood of an economy. And how it is that we can create the wealth that we need to make the sorts of investments to continue to improve our quality of life, create jobs, and do a whole host of other things. So we'll get into some of that. The Board of Trade, we're a 130-year-old organization. It's an interesting organization because we have industry members, but we also have government agencies, we have universities, and nonprofits. So really looking at the full portfolio of organizations that are engaged across our region. And, our region's a little bit unique, and Victor and Ben can attest to this as well from their different perspectives, in that we have 2 states, we have a District of Columbia, we have a federal government, and then we have some 37 plus sub-jurisdictions below that. And so if you think about trying to coordinate anything in this region, it becomes a bit of a challenge. It's not to suggest that other regions don't have their own challenges, but I'd like to say that ours are pretty unique. But nonetheless, I would say that, to Victor's point, we've been making a lot of progress over the past several years at really driving better collaboration across the region. And if there is a positive outcome from the pandemic, I think it's really accelerating those efforts, and it's to our benefit. One thing I like to say, we have about a $550 billion economic output in our region, So if we were a country, our GDP, we'd be on about the same size as Sweden. We'd be 25th, and so it's really to our advantage to start thinking of ourselves as a global economic powerhouse and what that means. And so anyway, it's really great to be here. Thank you. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us, Jack. And last but not least, Ben Wu, President and CEO of the Montgomery County Economic Development Corp. Ben, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks, Tian. And Anthony, thank you so much and Shulman Rogers for hosting the monthly blend and the opportunity to bring together Victor, me, and Jack. And Tian, thank you again for your leadership on our MCDC board. And I'm really pleased to be here with Victor and Jack because not only are they old friends, but we've had a chance to work together for, as Victor whispered, several decades. And so with Victor, he and I worked together in a gubernatorial administration, and Jack and I also served in a presidential administration together at the U.S. Department of Commerce. And so I've known these folks for a long time, and they're not only terrific, but what I really admire about them is that professionally and personally, they have been real leaders in our region and are real evangelists for regionalism, which is not something that had been easily accepted or embraced by a lot of folks. And being able to strengthen our own jurisdictions by enhancing our region, we've seen that it has great payback. And it really is a great investment to be able to say that the greater Washington area is a leader in quantum, in advanced technologies, in life sciences, in hospitality, and in several other industry sectors. And by being able to say that, then we can bring in greater attraction, and then they can choose within our jurisdictions where they want to go to make those investments. And by making our region stronger, we make our own jurisdiction stronger. And as a sign of that, we just had, as part of Maryland Economic Development Week, the tabulation and aggregation of all of the investments in the private sector that has been made in Montgomery County companies up to Q3, from January to the end of September. And we hit a record for IPOs, for private investment and venture capital. It's topped $18 billion, and that's across 78 companies' investments in life sciences, in health tech, in media and quantum industries. And so for us, this is a great sign that not only are companies, national and international companies, looking at Montgomery County, but it also, I think, signifies that we are now more confident than ever that we will be able to achieve a full economic recovery, and that these investments that are being made in Montgomery County, but also in the greater Washington area, are going to be able to show that there's a lot of confidence that investors are making in the greater Washington area, in Montgomery County. And so that puts us on a path forward that in which we can see that investors see the assets that we have and that we can fully recover from this pandemic. And I came on board just as the pandemic began. So I was able to turn to my peers, Victor and Jack, and they were able to give some great advice about how we can all work together to overcome what is the greatest economic devastation of our lifetime, and to be able to work together and be able to, as a region and within each of our jurisdictions, recover from this economic calamity. So it's great to be here, and I'm looking forward to a discussion on some of the issues that we've been working on and steps that we can continue to take to achieve this full economic recovery.
That's great, Ben. Thank you so much for your words. I couldn't agree with you more. And the fact that you and Victor and Jack have known each other and worked together and are friends for, several decades, really, I'm super optimistic about that kind of collaboration and friendship leading to deals getting done and bettering our region as a whole. To Jack's point about us living in a very unique region, having, three of you guys as pillars of economic development is a great thing for our region. Now I'd like to turn things over to Anthony Millen, my co-host. Anthony is a venture capitalist. He's a serial entrepreneur, and he's also a very well-known and well-respected attorney specializing in early stage and startups. And he is the founder and chair of Next, powered by Shulman Rogers. Anthony.
Great. Thank you, Tien, and thank you, Victor and Jack and Ben, for being with us today. I'd like to start off along the conversation and discussions that you had in your opening remarks about the uniqueness of the region as a region. And, when you each of you touched on that. And I'd like to have you just set out some of the significant actions and impacts your respective organizations have had in breaking down silos and connecting DC, Maryland, and Virginia as a regional force. And maybe through that, you'll be able to provide some guidelines to other sectors of the economy who can kind of follow the examples that you're all leading in working together in a regional way. And so maybe, Victor, we'll start with you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Anthony. Well, first of all, as I mentioned earlier, these last few years have been a real sea change in how we've worked together. I would say if we could put a date on it, I think that when Amazon issued its RFP for competition back in September of 2017, we were all put in a position where we had to start thinking about our organizations, our jurisdictions differently. Because as Jack so aptly pointed out, we're half a trillion dollar economy, $550 billion, $500 billion economy. Well, that's not what Arlington was. That's what the region is. The population of Arlington is 239,000, and that's where I was trying to recruit Amazon, and they could have owned the city if it were just there by itself. But because we're in a region of 6 million people, 3 million workers, 60 universities producing 90,000 graduates a year, 400,000 enroll, that discussion, those numbers, we started putting that together specifically to pursue this. And we actually did it with 4 jurisdictions in Northern Virginia. It was Fairfax County, Loudoun County, Arlington, and Alexandria. We had never worked together before that way. The point I wanted to make here is it set the stage for us becoming an alliance, because 2 years ago, in September 2019, 2 years after that RFP came out, we became an alliance. And that economic alliance has totally transformed what we do, how we share information, how we work and respect and honor each other. I mean, it's a very different set of working relationships. And honestly, that came about because of the way that the electeds responded to things like the transportation funding and maintenance of the metro. That opened the doors for us to work together. So now we have 10 jurisdictions working in Northern Virginia. And then all of a sudden, in suburban Maryland, they formed an alliance. And now, believe it or not, we're all working together with Connected DMV as kind of the basic infrastructure, a place where we can work together and be safe at this point. Now, this has been attempted many times in the past. The difference here is that there are things happening, and I'll let Ben talk about this because it's in his jurisdiction, but the Global Pandemic Response Center that was created out of a Connected DMV. He'll talk about that more in detail. But again, these are regional efforts. These are not just one jurisdiction working by itself.
Great, Ben. I think that would be great if you could pick up on that.
Yes, so as Victor mentioned, Northern Virginia has a regional alliance, and then when I came on board, we started the Maryland National Capital Regional Alliance as well for our Maryland jurisdictions, and we meet every week. Matter of fact, I just finished up our Mcdougall meeting just before arriving for this event. And what we're seeing is the importance of working together because there are alliances that we can have as we apply for the federal grants that have become now very ubiquitous because of the pandemic. There are alliances that we can achieve through our educational institutions as well as pursuing industry sectors. I had referenced quantum earlier. Quantum is this nascent technology that holds great potential, not just to transform our lives, but also from an economic perspective, but also from a national security perspective. And here in the greater Washington region, we have so many assets that are tied in to quantum, from the Pentagon over in Virginia to NSA over in Anne Arundel and Fort Meade. And then also University of Maryland, College Park is one of the leaders in the country on quantum. And we also had IonQ, which was just went public, and NASDAQ was valued at $2 billion, is also over at College Park, connected with the University of Maryland. And in Montgomery County, we see a great niche for us to pursue at the intersection of life sciences and quantum, especially since NIST, which is our nation's oldest federal laboratory, and the only one with the express mission of working with industry, also has a great expertise and a great record on quantum. So when we can cobble together these assets and apply them collectively, then we can, through Connected DMV, as a regional organization, apply for the $1 billion Build Back Better program that the administration is offering. And those are just the beginnings of other opportunities that we can work together and seize. I also want to just acknowledge what Victor had talked about with Amazon HQ2. We knew that Amazon was taking a serious look at the Greater Washington area. The 3 of the 20 finalists were in the Greater Washington area. And while in Maryland, we had our finalist site over in Montgomery County, we also recognized that by working together with the 2 governors and the mayor, that we could make the best case for having Amazon come to the Greater Washington area, recognizing that irrespective of the specific location where they wanted to site the HQ2, we could also benefit regionally through the workforce, through educational collaborations, and a number of other partnerships and linkages that industry would have just by the fact that HQ2 is here. And so back at the time I was working for Governor Hogan, and we were able to create a number of new compacts that previously had been unattainable, perhaps, with Northern Virginia and also with DC on metro, on education, on workforce. And so that helped set the stage for, I think, where we are now, because we all collectively understood the power of the region just based off of our Amazon HQ2 efforts.
In terms of DC, Jack, it would be great to just hear, we've heard from Ben and from Victor, just some of the actions and impacts you've seen in terms of that component of the region and how that has helped move things forward on a regional basis.
I think one of the things, we've talked a little bit here about Amazon HQ2, and that really is, I think, a crown jewel, if you will, in any economic development portfolio. And hats off certainly to Victor and his team and all the folks in Northern Virginia, as well as to Ben and folks in Maryland and across the region for really approaching that from a regional integrated perspective. And if we get into it a little bit more, and Victor can share these details much better than I can, but it really was a very interesting package that was put together that really helped to land Amazon. And it included a lot of elements that were pointed out that aren't necessarily just for the benefit of Amazon, but really benefited the region and created this really new, vibrant ecosystem. One example I'll give you in national landing right now is that you have some of the real estate, the commercial real estate development companies that are building out national landing. They're actually bidding on spectrum allocations. That's an entirely new way to be thinking about how to provide value to your customers and clients. And this region is leading in those types of areas. So that's a potential outcome that we see as a result of that, which is really very interesting. The one thing I would say, though, and both Victor and Ben touched on this too, is that, one of the things that we really needed to do in our region was to upgrade our public transit system, and particularly WMATA. And so one of the things that the Board of Trade was very actively engaged as a founding partner in an organization called Metro Now, that worked with a lot of organizations across the region, including Ben and Victor and local officials and industry and nonprofits and trade associations and labor and everyone that you could imagine, to really then work to get dedicated funding for our metro system. Ours was the only public metro system in the country that didn't have dedicated funding, and so we couldn't make capital improvements. And it was putting us at a significant disadvantage. And so as we keep creating jobs, if we didn't figure out how to do that, that was going to hold us back. And so I think that was one real strong example of regional collaboration and the region coming together. And as you might imagine, there's a lot of reluctance for Virginia to want to invest in something that benefits Maryland, and vice versa. And that's been kind of the history of how the region has approached some of those things. And we're beginning to overcome those barriers and those hurdles, which I think is going to benefit all of us. And then both Ben and Victor mentioned an organization called Connected DMV. And so Connected DMV was created and generated at the Board of Trade and spun off as an organization that can really now help drive some of these collaborative region-wide initiatives. And that's what it's designed to do. And as was alluded to right now, Connected DMV is looking at a regional hydrogen energy center, a regional pandemic response center, a regional quantum computing center, and then also really heavily involved with Victor and Ben around a new and different, more integrated approach towards regional economic development. And what does that look like? And so those are a couple of examples of where we've been involved and engaged and really trying to push on the regional buttons.
So we've spoken, and all of you have touched on kind of looking backwards a little bit in terms of the way things used to be. And then you all kind of talked about some of these pivotal moments and events that have kind of moved us to where we are today. I'm sure in kind of the leadership roles that all three of you play, you spend a lot of time also looking forward in terms of where we could be and should be. And so I think it would be really interesting to hear from each of you as you look at the startup ecosystem in the DMV and the regional ecosystem over the next 3 to 5 years, where you think we're going to be as a region versus where we are now. And some of the ideas and steps that you think we should be doing. So actions we should take, investments we should make, ways we should change we doing things so that we end up in 3 to 5 years meeting the visions that you all have for the future of the region. And maybe this time, Ben, we'll start with you.
Well, thanks, Anthony. For Montgomery County, and I think Victor probably feels the same sort of pressure in Fairfax County. We're 25% of the state's GDP, and we're double the next jurisdiction, Baltimore County, and then Baltimore City. And so we are the leader in the greater Washington area. So we recognize that the state cannot recover economically from this pandemic unless we help lead the way. And so as a consequence, we've been focused on ways in which we can continue to transform our economic development. And being able to promote greater entrepreneurship is one of those key elements because we want to be able to take companies from startup to scale up and then beyond. We also want to be able to leverage our unique assets that we have in Montgomery County, especially our federal assets, NIH, FDA, NIST, as well as a number of the other federal laboratories, to be able to link with them and also to help promote greater technology licensing and commercialization and cooperation through CRADAs. We see that that is a unique resource that we have in Montgomery County relative to the rest of the country. And we also want to make sure that we have the ecosystem that will allow for companies to grow and sustain themselves. That means greater access to capital. That means greater workforce potential and incubators support. The access to capital issue is one that I know that regionally we would love to be able to help try to increase the amount of venture capital firms that are in the region, because theoretically they will be looking in their backyard more easily than elsewhere. So being able to attract VCs, VC investment, because of record, as I mentioned earlier, we're showing record numbers, which is great, but being able to create and have an attraction for VC companies into the greater Washington area, specifically Montgomery County. And we have NEA here, but we'd love to be able to increase that. And that would give greater potential, we think, for some of the access to capital issues and financing. We also want to be able to tap in more on the federal and state efforts on access to capital. There are a number of new programs out there that SBA, EDA, and others are promoting, and we would love to be able to engage more directly with that as well. I think supporting this ecosystem to allow for companies to grow, for entrepreneurs to be able to take their idea and crystallize that into a company that can then employ jobs and also then to build up these companies. That's where we want to spend a lot of time and we want to make a priority in the near term.
Great. Yeah, I absolutely agree with the importance of the early stage and startup ecosystem to the future growth in the region. Victor, where do you see things 3 to 5 years from now and steps we should be taking to get there?
Well, 3 to 5 years from now, we will be in a very different position than we are in right now, specifically because so much funding has gone behind things like the George Mason University Innovation Tech Campus. It's under construction right now. That'll be a $500 million campus, public-private partnerships already being integrated. The Virginia Tech Campus, $1 billion innovation tech campus. By the way, already an existing, incredibly producing engineering marvel, University of Maryland College Park. I believe that these universities are going to grow in leaps and bounds in terms of their relationship to small business and also the generation of IP. And as we all know here, we all know this, that IP creates opportunity in the marketplace. And that IP, as you know, Anthony, probably better than any of us on this Zoom call, it is really at the core of these companies. I think of companies like Appian, which is a low-code company, started out with 4 guys, in Northern Virginia, is now a $2 billion valued company. I mean, these things happen because of IP, not because of anything else. So I think the relationship between universities, the entrepreneur, and commercialization is going to be transformed. That's one thing I see. Another is how these companies themselves really work with the universities and actually use that to augment the environment that the small businesses, that these great ideas come from, and many times, because they are always searching for great ideas. I mean, Amazon has an innovation center. A lot of people don't know this. They have an innovation center that has existed for years in Arlington, Virginia. Cap One has an innovation center in Arlington, Virginia. They are all about new ideas. And I believe these companies are going to be seeking more ways to get directly to entrepreneurs and support them as they grow. Now, we have Refraction, which is an accelerator. We have accelerators in DC, in Montgomery County. So we have this set of infrastructure, but this will be a new one, I believe. I believe this will be the one we've been looking for. Look, there's no magic. It's all work. But the point is, the stage is set, the money is there, and also the desire is there. And that's what I find exciting. The last thing I'll touch on is something that really impressed me was when Connected DMV, we worked with them. I said I'm on the board of trustees of Connected DMV. And as we went through the application process, and by the way, so is Jack Mcdougall, as we went through the process of putting this together, and Ben too, so we're all here, so we're all in this thing together. As we worked on this idea, what I was stunned at was that Howard University, University of Maryland College Park, and George Mason University all had heavy investment already resident in their universities in quantum, already evaluating opportunities in hydrogen. This is where I believe it's going to come from. I mean, you heard Ben talk about IonQ, going public and really dazzling everybody. It's really the real quantum computing company out there right now. So I guess what I'm saying is that I think that the relationship and really how we use universities, how we work with universities will change dramatically. So that's what I'm really excited about over the next 3 to 5 years.
Great. So, Jack, we've heard about the importance of venture and capital access to building and sustaining growing companies and the universities. Just as we conclude this segment of the show, kind of what is your vision for the region over this next period of time and some of the steps we could take to get there?
So I would suggest we need to have a renewed emphasis on to ensure that we don't implode from the weight of our success. If that makes sense. So as Victor and Ben are out there and they're working to attract, retain, and grow companies, that's putting an awful lot of stress on multiple systems across our region, transportation systems, housing, and other things. And so we have to really have I think, a much more proactive, and we're getting there. There's a lot of things underway right now, so I don't want to suggest there isn't, but I think we need to continue to accelerate all of those efforts to address those issues. Nobody wants to go back to pre-pandemic traffic jams. That doesn't work for anybody. And if we're going to bring more people in, we've got to have the flexibility. People have got to be able to move around. If we're going to have a really dynamic, innovative, entrepreneurial startup ecosystem across our regions, we have to address that. People have to be able to afford to live here, right? People have to be able to have access to healthcare. And then, the biggest thing that's afflicting our region too is around socioeconomic issues and the fact that, so many folks aren't able to participate in the economy. And so what is that doing? Both as a detraction, but we're not really able to use all of our resources. So racial inclusivity and inclusive economic growth are have always been really critical issues, but even more so now. And so how is it that we can address those issues as we move forward? And so I think over the next 3 to 5 years we'll start to see pretty significant progress in those areas, but it's going to require all hands at the table to make sure that happens. And if it does, then I think we'll be in a really good place.
Thank you. Between the three of you, I think we've provided a great vision to our listeners as to how to get to where we would like to be.
This concludes part 1 of our 2-part episode featuring a terrific economic development discussion with 3 amazing guests. Victor Hoskins, President and CEO of the Fairfax County Economic Development Authority, Jack Mcdougall, President and CEO of the Greater Washington Board of Trade, and Ben Wu, President and CEO of the Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation. Thank you so much for joining us today, and please do join us for part 2 of this awesome episode. Again, for more information and to subscribe, please visit us at www.themonthlyblend.com. Thank you.